This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by lynda.com, the unparalleled online video training library. For a free 10-day unlimited trial, visit lynda.com/MacVoices. And by the MacVoices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter for MacVoices viewers and listeners. Get the inside scoop on all the MacVoices news by visiting macvoices.com/newsletter to subscribe. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the Talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we have another Take Control author with us this time. This time, though, this is a first book. Well, not for her, but it's a first book on this particular topic. The book is Take Control of Numbers. Of course, numbers being Apple's spreadsheet, not numbers. And the author is Sharon Zardetto. Sharon, it's great to have you. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. And we could talk about numbers if you want. But it's probably not going to be very helpful to the listeners.
Yeah, well, I actually think that the spreadsheet is pretty interesting. I don't think it gets enough credit, and that's why I was so glad to see this book. That first of all, people will take it seriously if they weren't before, and second, that they have someone to walk them through the inevitable comparisons to Excel and what makes numbers worth their time and effort. What makes it worth their time and effort, Sharon?
Well, it's much smoother to use in so many ways. And of course, since it's the Mac interface, I don't know how to put this. It's beautiful to work with. It's nice to work with. It's pleasing. It's not ugly. It's I guess that rounds it up, doesn't it? And a lot of people just assume that since Excel is the standard and the Mac is easy, that somehow makes the Apple spreadsheet a lesser being. And in some ways it is. Of course, it doesn't have everything Excel has. But most people don't need to use everything that Excel has.
Would you repeat that? Because I think that's such a key point, that people think, well, I might need this. And the odds are you're probably not going to need it. You're never going to need it. But
yeah, Excel has more, but most people don't need that more. And so why should they suffer through the things that are in common with these two programs and deal with Excel's, I'll just call it the interface that hasn't been updated in 20 years, instead of working with something that's a pleasure to work in.
That's saying it rather politely. The interface hasn't been updated in 20 years.
Instead of working with Excel's never-ending grid of cells, you can work with a blank window. You can put a table on it, and that's where you get your grid of cells. You can put a chart on it. You can move things around. You can put shapes on it. You can put text boxes on it. And it just gives you more variety in the way you can present your information, for instance. I'll get to this a little more later, but there's a downloadable spreadsheet that goes with the book, and there are 26 sheets on it that I set up to go with the book, but there are also, most of them are standalone tutorials, and I couldn't have done this in Excel. I couldn't put a table with two different, in effect, spreadsheets, two different tables on one window with pictures and text and showing you what to do. Couldn't do something like that in Excel. And while that may not be what most people want to do with numbers, they can use the same components to do the things they need to do for work. It's much more flexible.
So this is an interesting book, and this is a big book for a Take Control book. 326 pages, 235 figures, so it's obviously a very visual book. And as I understand it, you had to write and rewrite this book a couple times for different reasons?
Yes, and first of all, let me say I'm very thankful that this software counts the number of figures, because I didn't go back and count how many pictures. And I specifically didn't count how many I had to redo. When I started the book, it was just prior to Yosemite's release. And I'd taken a bunch of screenshots as I wrote the first draft. And I had to redo all of them because, of course, the Yosemite interface is so different. I mean, even buttons in Windows. And then I was just about caught up with all that and going back to the writing. And then Numbers was updated to version 3.5, which had some significant changes in it. And one of them was parts of its interface. So I did have to do those pictures all over again. So I probably did 500 pictures. And I don't do just screenshots. I slap them into Photoshop. I move things around. I highlight things. And I may have taken more time with the figures than I did with the actual writing, I think, sometimes.
That's a good thing, especially here, because from what you've said so far, I mean, Numbers is going to be a spreadsheet. That we all know how spreadsheets work, and especially at a very simple level, some of us take more advantage than others. But Numbers is a lot more visual, I think, than Excel, both from just a working with standpoint as well as a presentation and capabilities standpoint.
Yes, but I think it's also important to point out that it's not all looks. It's not just looks. To convince an Excel user, not that I'm looking to convince anybody other than, hey, you should try this. I'm not saying you should move, but to even give an Excel user a reason to look at something else, you can't say, well, because it's easier to use, because it looks better. The truth is, it has most of the power of Excel. It doesn't have all of the functions that Excel has. But again, most people don't use that, whatever, say 10 to 20% of the functions that Excel has that Numbers does not.
Sharon, given that there were a lot of changes as you wrote the book, what do you think, at the end of the day, what are some of the most exciting and interesting things about Numbers? And I know it's a spreadsheet, folks. Okay, so don't send emails. But there have to be some exciting and interesting things here.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry to interrupt there, but and argue with you, but I'm a spreadsheet geek. I don't know when you might have started playing with spreadsheets, but I did perhaps in 1985 on the Mac. So the Mac was about a year old, and that's when Microsoft put out a spreadsheet for the Mac, and it was called Multiplan. Do you remember that?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and I just loved it. And I actually wrote in the intro to the book that what I did was I did my taxes on it because I liked, I just typed things in so it looked like the right forms. And I actually printed them out and sent those to the IRS. But, and that was perfectly acceptable because I made it look like the regular forms. But I loved hooking up how things added up here and this percentage there and where was my home office deduction. And so because I just liked working with spreadsheets and numbers and figuring out the formulas. So for me, that's enough. But it makes it easier to do it now when you have an approach that Numbers uses. You can have different tables on a sheet, but you can also have different sheets, what Excel users call worksheets, or what Excel considers worksheets. They're called sheets, or I refer to them as tabs in Numbers. They're similar to the tabs, multiple tabs you can have when you're working in Safari. And you can link tables, your little spreadsheets, that go from one tab to another. They're not islands unto themselves. So there's really a lot you can do and present your information in a much more clear way, and actually manipulate your information that's in a way that's more clear to you. You can have one table, that's the grid of cells, on one tab, and then another category on another tab, and you can still do calculations across the tabs. But while I'm talking about tabs, let me say that one of the worst things about Numbers is how it handles tabs. As I said, they're similar to the tabs you use in Safari. But there's no way in Numbers to jump from one tab to another other than click on one. But you can only see, perhaps, for instance, on a laptop, about 6 tabs across, and then they scroll. So if you need to go from tab 1 to tab 22, you have to scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll until you get to that tab 22. There's no menu that lets you jump. And the example spreadsheet file that I made for the book has 26 or 27 tabs in it. And I thought, well, that's going to be a nightmare for the user. So I did come up with a little trick to help with navigations. But what I basically used was I put a hidden number on each sheet, a hidden code sort of, and then you just do a search for it, and it'll jump you to that sheet because the find function looks through the whole file. But that's just not doable for most situations. Anyway, so as I said, speaking of tabs, the implementation is really terrible.
Okay, it sounds like a reasonable workaround, not one that you'd want to have to do if you were working with 20 or 30 tabs. But if you have one or two extra,
Yes, if you have a half dozen or 10 or whatever, that's easy enough to scroll through because I don't know if I just said that the tabs are fixed sizes, so it's not like they get smaller if you have a crowded tab bar. They're still take up a lot of space, no matter excuse me, no matter how short the name is. And it's a really pretty silly approach. But I'm willing to put up with it for now.
Yeah. I know Tanya Angst and I had a discussion about numbers, and she was talking about how much she felt like she got out of this book. She started using numbers after she did the edit of your book, because obviously she has to read it, and she learned so many things. I'd like to split it into two categories. The first one being the actual work with numbers. How do you feel that compares to Excel? The ease of input, the ease of manipulation, formula creation, that kind of thing?
I think in some ways it's a little easier than Excel. I mean, look, I'm the kind of person who would prefer to just type a formula in and use plain text and go at it that way. Whereas numbers uses tokens for everything, the same little blue lozenges that when you do a find in the Finder, or if you're working in Apple Mail and you do something like, you type name : and it turns into a lozenge, a token, and then you type the next thing. So in numbers, when you write a formula or put a formula in, any function you use, for instance, sum or average, it goes into a little token. And then you click on the cells you want to sum, and the cell range also goes in as a token. That makes it much easier for beginners, but I think people like me prefer to just keep typing. And you can type and it turns into tokens. And you can also say, just display this as text. Everything you do for formulas is put into something called the formula editor. It's a tiny little pop-up palette, and it lets you manipulate the tokens and so on. Whereas in Excel, you've got I don't even recall what it's called, the formula bar, for instance, I guess. And that's up at I don't even remember at this point, I'm sorry, whether it's at the top of the worksheet or at the bottom of the worksheet. But the one in numbers floats around, and it's actually, you can drag it around and see what you're doing. And as you type your formula, you see the answer thus far in the bottom of the window. It's very flexible and helps you along. It took me quite a while to get used to it, because as I said, I prefer just sort of typing straight text and see the result. But I think for all beginners and then most users, it is a preferable approach.
This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by lynda.com, the unparalleled online video training library. Get a full 10-day free trial at lynda.com/MacVoices. Do you want to learn something new? Do you need to learn something new? Maybe your skills at Excel need polishing, or you need to learn database management with FileMaker, or website building and management with Dreamweaver or Squarespace. You can learn all of that and much, much more at lynda.com. They have over 3,000 courses about topics you really want to learn about. Get a first look at Apple's Photos app, or learn programming for iOS 8. Get up to speed with Lightroom or Adobe Premiere. lynda.com has the best authors teaching you those subjects. Not people you never heard of, but names you know and trust. And if you don't know them, just Google them, and you'll find out just how qualified they are to teach you about their subjects. But lynda.com is a lot more than just a listing of videos and topics. One of my favorite lynda.com features are the 10-minute tips. Not only do I get to sample new topics and instructors in short order, but I pick up useful tips and tricks at the same time. And I try to make at least a weekly pass through the What's New section to find out about the latest courses and updates posted to lynda.com. That helps me stay current with what's out there and to add to my personal playlist. Did I say playlist? lynda.com lets you set up your own playlists so that you can watch things in the order you wish, or choose from their pre-curated lists that help guide you through the topics you're interested in. lynda.com has so many options, it's hard to name them all. That's why you need to sign up for a free 10-day trial at lynda.com/MacVoices so you can explore the videos, watch as many as you like during the trial period, and explore everything that lynda.com has to offer. That's 10 days of free unlimited learning, unlimited videos, and unlimited exploring at lynda.com/MacVoices. Sign up today, sample their over 3,000 courses, and learn something new. Thanks to lynda.com for their support of MacVoices. Okay, so let's switch to the fun part of spreadsheets, at least for those of us who aren't the numbers and spreadsheet geeks that you claim to be. And that is the charts and the graphs and all those kind of things. How does numbers stack up against Excel in that area?
First of all, I have to say that I haven't played with Excel charts in a while, but based on the interface that Numbers provides, it's really incredible. You can go crazy and make your data totally non-interpretable if you want with these charts. There's just so many choices. So you do have to be practice a little discretion. But you can turn, for instance, a bar chart into 3D bars, and then you could tilt them along two different axes. And you can say, and I want the light coming in from over here, and make it bronze and silver instead of just flat colors. I'm not sure that's all that helpful. But you can use it to highlight what you need highlighted. You can even put graphics inside, for instance, inside a pie chart, instead of just plain colors. I did one sample. That's one of the figures where I put, something like favorite kindergarten activities, and the three slices of the pie chart. One has scissors and paste, and one has crayons, and one has finger paints, and then they're labeled also. But that's the kind of thing that you can do for an infographic, And again, I'm not sure that Excel can't do that, because I haven't bothered with charts in Excel for a long time.
And that's it. You hit exactly where I was going with that, because it does seem like in our world today, we have a lot more infographics. We have a lot more visual representations of data, as opposed to just streams, columns and rows of numbers. And my impression, and I haven't played that much with Excel charts either, but the little bit I have, it seems like they've always struck me as a bit difficult to work with, whereas numbers charts feel like they're a bit easier to work with once you get the numbers vibe.
Yes, they're probably easier to abuse too, both in formatting and this isn't unique to Numbers, but a lot of people don't know when to use a bar chart versus a line chart, or even when a pie chart is appropriate, and things like that. So I do have a section of the book that describes each of the kinds of charts and when they should be used or avoided, as the case may be. So there's some guidance. There's some guidance for that.
Great. Because as someone who sits through a lot of really, really ugly presentations, it's become a sport now to figure out which is the worst presentation I've seen this month. I love the fact that anybody's out there giving any kind of guidance to these people, because it's been one of those things that I guess is the nature of computers, that you get it, so you think, oh, I'm a desktop publisher, and if I put 25 fonts in a single page, it'll look great.
Oh yes, the ransom note document, right?
Exactly. And now we've seen some of that with some of the infographic things, where some are very intuitive and very entertaining, and others just obfuscate the information, if not eliminate its ability to be understood entirely.
Yeah, well, look, to be fair, I mean, excuse me, what you learn in high school and even in college math are the basic charts. So everybody's familiar with line charts and bar charts and maybe scatter charts. But I don't think we're necessarily taught when to use the kind, or mixed charts where you can have one value represented by bars, and with the other series is a line going across them. So I do devote some time to that, so that people use all these nifty features but use them correctly. And Numbers also has interactive charts, which are, I hate to say cool, and I never write it in the book. I avoid it. In all my writing for 30 years on the Mac, I never call anything cool. But you know what? This is pretty cool. I think in the book I called it nifty, just to avoid the word cool. But interactive charts are really cool. For instance, you have a bar chart with or a column chart with 3 columns on it representing, I don't know, widgets and gadgets and whatever else. And you have the 2012 data and the 2013 data and the 2014, and they're all separate. So instead of having 3 charts, you put all the data into this one chart, and you just click a control, and it skips from one data set to the next data set, and you see the bars growing or shrinking or whatever. And I think that adds, if you're doing a presentation, that adds an incredible, I don't know, intuitive, people can grasp it more intuitively if they see these things change rather than looking at all three of them, looking from the one and then the second. If you actually see them grow and shrink, I think it just gives you the information in a great way.
Tell me about bubble charts and what they're for.
Bubble charts. Bubble charts they perhaps are not misused at their basics. A bubble chart gives you an X and Y axis the same way you would do a scatter chart, just putting dots where the X and Y values meet. But there's a Z value in bubble charts that then adds, in effect, a third dimension to your data. And the size of the bubble is what counts. So you have your X-axis along the bottom and your Y-axis, the vertical one, and you have a dot someplace, but the dot gets bigger and bigger or smaller depending what it represents at any given spot. But the problem is it's very hard to figure out when you're looking at circles how much bigger a bigger one is. Because is it the area of the circle that counts, or is it the diameter that counts? And those are very different things. And you can set both of them in numbers. I mean, you can set either one, but we can't compare a circle. A circle that would be twice the size of another might be twice the area or twice the diameter, but those circles would come out in two different sizes. So you can never be sure. Plus, people are not really good at comparing areas of figures, even boxes. If you start with kids and you say, draw me a square twice the size of this one, they'll pretty much draw you a rectangle and not realize, well, if you draw it twice the size, that's maybe 4 times the data, because all of a sudden you have 4 squares the size of the original one. So it's very hard to interpret those. Anyway, so you avoid them like the plague. I do put some links in the book to some sites that, let's say, debunk the use of certain infographics and certain types of charts, and it would behoove users to take a look at those before they try their own fancy charts.
Sharon, it sounds like you've taken numbers and you've not only taught us about the spreadsheet itself and how it works, but also a little bit about how to use spreadsheets and the charts and the graphics and all to more effectively communicate the information.
Well, I hope I've done that, because it would, first of all, be a very dry book if I just listed, okay, here's where this is and here's where that is, without giving some information about how best to present your data. There's combo charts, for instance, or area charts that look like mountains, and they overlap each other if you've got 2 data series to take care of. So you can make one of them transparent so you could see the other, or you could mix them and use an area chart for one of the series and a bar chart for the other, or a line chart, so you can see them both. So I do try and say, look, here's not just how to do it, but here's why you do it this way. Didn't have enough pages to go into that as much as I would have liked to, but it had to be produced at some point. I had to get to the end of the book at some point or another.
One thing I've used numbers for a lot more than I ever use Excel, because Excel, you can do it in Excel, but it just never feels quite as easy and as decent in numbers. It's just simple lists. Is organizing lists of things in numbers seems to me to just feel a lot better. Is that me, or do you think numbers is built a little bit with that in mind?
I think first of all, I think that's an interesting question. Second, I think they are probably quite even in being able to do that and let you manipulate those lists. But I do think it's easier in numbers. And I try not to be prejudiced when I compare, I was going to say PC stuff, but even Excel on the Mac. I try not to just jump into, but the Apple interface is so much nicer. But it really is. And handling lists, though, basically you're usually talking about text when you're talking about handling lists. Is that what you're referring to? Before I skew my answer towards the text issue.
That and the occasional maybe numbered list or something like that, where or something that you're trying to manipulate. Well, see, if you're manipulating numbers, then it's not a list; it's a spreadsheet. So yeah, I'll say text.
Well, you know what? You're still manipulating it if you're sorting it or changing the rows or whatever. So that could be a list also. I mean, I kept a list of all the tables and the spreadsheets I was making for the book, and so the first column had the number of the chapter, and the next column had the name of the chapter, and the next column said what example spreadsheet was going to go with that. And of course, that needed several rows because some of them have 3 or 4 spreadsheets go with the chapter. So I was manipulating the text and manipulating the numbers in that. I had to keep track of what number spreadsheet it was. So chapter 1 might have 1 spreadsheet, chapter 2 had 3, chapter 3 had 2, and I had to also keep saying, oh, okay, now I have 5 altogether. So I was manipulating those numbers, even though they were literally numbering the contents. I'm not sure I'm explaining that correctly, but I can manipulate numbers without adding them. It's just, okay, look at the last thing, and if the last thing was sheet number 4, make this one the last thing plus 1, so it would say sheet 5 on it. So that's a different way of manipulating numbers.
I love the fact that you used numbers, the spreadsheet, to take control of numbers. I think that's great. You weren't just dissecting it, but you were actually using it at the same time.
Well, and it was really helpful because there's, as I said, I think there's 26 or 27 sample spreadsheets. And as we worked on the book and decided, and when I say we, I had several editors, but Tanya Engst is the series editor and the boss lady. And so at the end, it was like, well, maybe we should present this information first. Let's swap these chapters. And thank goodness that was so easy because I kept track of things in numbers. So it just renumbered all of my sample spreadsheets to go with it. And yet I started the book thinking, I'm not going to talk about text. I hate it when people give me a spreadsheet with names and addresses in it, and it really should be a database and blah, 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 blah. But then I realized, you know what, there's really good reasons to use a spreadsheet for text. And in fact, I devoted quite a bit of time to writing about, so now you have a spreadsheet with names and addresses and phone numbers. How do you, if the first and last names are in a single cell and you want to sort them by last name, how do you split those names? How do you grab the last name out of a cell that has 2 or 3 names in it? So I do talk about text functions a lot, which is one of my favorite things to do, although I usually do it in a database rather than in a spreadsheet. And also for lists, if you're working with lists, the nifty thing is I'm big on checking things off and having a checklist of things to do. And it just feels so good to check them off. In fact, I often realize, I've already done 2 or 3 things. Let me write them in and I'll check them off right away. And then I have check marks on my list already. And numbers let you turn a cell into a checkbox so that you can easily check things off when they're done. And I think that's a very useful approach for listing things. I wouldn't buy a spreadsheet program just to make lists, but if you have it already, it is a very useful tool.
And with numbers, there is that little issue of price. It's if you bought a recent Mac or a Mac anytime in the not too long ago, it's pretty much free.
Yes, that's hard to beat, isn't it? And it will open your previous versions, your previous numbers spreadsheets. It doesn't work the other way. You can't open we'll call it numbers 3. It doesn't have an official name. That you can't open a numbers 3 document back in one of the iWorks numbers. There's forward compatibility, but not backward compatibility. It's also, in some cases, I've been reading online, it's been difficult to open your previous spreadsheets in the current, in numbers 3. And I do address that in one spot, and it has to do with using your iCloud account to transfer these documents. Which, speaking of iCloud, there's iCloud numbers, which I don't actually write about because it's still in beta. But if you go to your iCloud, iCloud.com, and sign in, you'll see betas for Numbers and Pages and Keynote. And I haven't had time to play with Pages or Keynote at all. But Numbers, I was really, really surprised to find that it mimics the Mac version, your on-screen version, almost perfectly. I mean, if you learn from this book or any place else, but I'd like to say you should learn from this book how to use Numbers. Once iCloud comes out of beta, or if you want to try it now, there's very little that you can't do with the information, just from the information in this book. They really make it mirror what it looks like on the computer. I don't know what to call it. Computer-based one, the Mac-based one, your local numbers. I'm not even sure how to differentiate that when you're just talking about it. But it's really great. And the Numbers version that's for your iPad, or if you want to squint and use it on your iPhone, is also very similar. As long as you know, well, obviously you're going to have to tap rather than click, and there's a few places you have to look for, well, where is that interface feature on this screen? But the basics of spreadsheeting are the same: how to build formulas and how to format cells. So while I didn't write this book, there was no way I could write this book to cover all three versions, let's say, the iCloud version and the mobile device version and the Mac version. I could not accommodate that. Michael Cohen did a great job of that when he wrote about Pages. He did address each specific platform, but I just couldn't do it in this. He's a better man than I am. What can I say?
I don't know about that. Sharon, let's wrap this up with a question I usually ask at the beginning of a Take Control session, and modifying it a little bit. Who is Take Control of Numbers for? And maybe more broadly, who is Numbers as a program for?
Let me take the second one first. That's what I'm humming, because the first question's easy. Unless you have super heavy-duty spreadsheet needs. Well, first of all, you know what? I'll take that one back. The main thing is, if your workplace requires Excel because it needs the Excel format so other people can open them, then of course you need to stay with Excel. That's not to say that Numbers cannot open Excel spreadsheets or that Excel can't open Numbers spreadsheets, because you can export things from Numbers into an Excel format and you can open it there. But the two do have, since they have different approaches, for instance, in Excel you do a chart and it sort of floats on top of the spreadsheet, whereas in Numbers it's on your spreadsheet. It's on your sheet because it's a blank canvas that you can put all sorts of elements on. So the information goes, but not always in the place where you want it. So you can export to Excel and you can open Excel right in Numbers as well. Some of the more, I don't want to say obscure because that's not quite fair, but some 15 to 20% perhaps even of Excel functions aren't in Numbers, but the more esoteric functions. So, some people have to stick with Excel. That's all there is to it. Numbers is, I think, much better for beginners because the usual Apple ease of use and interface that if you know something about the Mac, you sort of know half what you need to know about Numbers. So that's always much better for a beginner. I had a lot of testers as I wrote there's a tutorial for beginners in the book that runs 30 pages, and it's for people who've never touched a spreadsheet or people coming from Excel or people who just haven't used Numbers and would rather have a little more hand-holding to start with. So there's a 30-page tutorial. I tested parts of it. My youngest guinea pig is actually, well, she did just turn 11, but at the time she was 10 and a half, and she really liked those interactive charts. They happened to be doing charts in math, and at the time she was in fourth grade. And when she could do column charts and change the numbers and see them change, she, of course, mostly she wanted to know, how can I make that pink and how can I make that purple? That was her main thing. Other than that, the more serious users started at age 13. And I guess the oldest one was 68. So I had a 50-year span of testers for that. And everybody really enjoyed it. And the one guy, one of the older guys, actually bought a Mac. And I've known him for 25 years and been dissing his PC all along. And 2 months ago, he said, okay, I give up. And he got a Mac. So I thought that was a triumph. Anyway, so what was the main question? I've been off on that tangent. Who's it for? People who've used previous versions of Numbers across, of course. And if you just want a smoother experience in Excel, or you're not using that supercharged, I don't know if let's call it 15% of Excel, and you don't need it, there's no reason not to switch, especially as you said, the price is right. And I think everybody really enjoy working in this.
Well, we certainly appreciate your efforts, and I've enjoyed the book, and I've hoped that folks will go to takecontrolbooks.com. That's where you can get it, download it as a PDF or an ebook in your favorite format. It's a great way to kind of break into numbers and maybe take a little more advantage of it if you've opened it and closed it and maybe played a little bit with it. Sharon will walk you through and help you get the most out of it. Sharon, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much. I hope you'll come back when the next book is ready and do it again.
Well, thank you, and thanks for seeing me through our technical difficulties at the beginning of this session, which of course nobody gets to hear. But I just will say that we had a one-sided conversation for a while, didn't we? Chuck kept saying, "Could you hear me?" And I kept emailing him saying, "Yeah," but you can't hear me.
Yeah, but we got it done. We
did.
We figured it out. So.
All right, thank you so much for inviting me on.
We'll talk to you again soon.
Okay, bye.
Folks, take control of numbers. Again, takecontrolbooks.com. Go check it out. Don't overlook numbers. Don't be an Excel bigot. I think you'll be very, very pleasantly surprised at what you can get done with numbers. Until the next time, this is MacVoices. I'm Chuck Joyner. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and the MacVoices blog. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the MacVoices Dispatch, to stay up to date on all the latest MacVoices news from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Do more with your Apple tech by subscribing to the free MacVoices magazine on Flipboard by visiting macvoices.com/magazine. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.